welcome to the first lesson in Photoshop. Just to be clear, this is a lesson about Photoshop for photographers, so we're not going to be doing anything about graphic design work, but it's going to be focused mostly on how to take photographs that you've made in your digital camera or on your iPhone and get them into a better looking format using Photoshop. In this course, we're going to look at digital editing and enhancing your images. And we're going to show you how to get the best out of the images that you have. Photoshop is an amazing tool, and it really is the digital darkroom. In the past, when you took photographs on film, you would have to take your undeveloped spool of film into the laboratory. They would then send it off potentially, and a week later you'd get your photos back all nice and ready for you to look at, and that whole process was invisible to many photographers. Nowadays, though, it's our job, in a sense, as photographers, to be able to edit and process our images, and that's what this is all about. So this is aimed at photographers. If you're a graphic designer, of course, I assume that you'll learn something here, but we're not going to be putting together brochures or marketing materials or anything like that. We're going to be looking at how do we make photographs look better in Photoshop. So as a photographer, as a digital photographer, we are now responsible for the processing of our photographs. In the past, that was done by the lab, but those days now are gone, really. Generally, photographers don't send their photos off to someone to get processed. We are generally responsible for that. So I'm going to talk to you a little bit about Photoshop. The main thing about Photoshop as a product is that you need to learn a workflow. A workflow is almost like a recipe in a sense. It's a step-by-step way of going through your photos using the tools in the correct order to get the result that you want. So this image that I have up on screen over here right now, this was taken up in the Yukon in northern Canada, and it was actually a scene that was early morning. You can see beautiful soft light, and I'm going to show you a little bit later on the before and the after, and you'll see just the kind of work that I did to get the image to look the way that it does. Before we do that, I'm going to just talk a little bit about the interface. The actual, what you see on the screen right now is actually a screenshot of the Photoshop interface. And this is going to be something that we refer to all the time. So I want you to understand more about how this works. The first thing you're going to notice down the left-hand side of the screen is what is called the tool panel. Now, in that tool panel on the left-hand side is all the possible tools that you will need in order to make changes to your photographs, to process your images. So in there you've got the selection tools, you've got the healing brush tools, you've got the fill tools, the patch tools, you've got dodge and burn tools. All of these tools we're going to go through during this course. That is all on the left hand side. When you click on any one of those tools, you'll notice at the top the options panel will change. That's the options panel at the top. So each tool on the left hand side has a linked options panel with it. What that means is when you click on, for example, a selection tool, it'll start asking you things like how thick do you want the selection to be? Do you want the selection to be added to another selection, or do you want it to subtract from another selection? Do you want it to be a new selection? So it gives you different options based on whatever tool you're using, and those options at the top are relevant to each tool. So as you click on each tool on the left hand side, you'll notice that the options panel at the top will change with different variations, and we're going to go into detail on that. On the right hand side you have the panels area, and you can actually put different panels in there depending on what it is you want to be doing with your images, and we're going to show you how to do that. But the first thing that you'll notice at the top is the name histogram. Next to that you'll see navigator. We also have the layers panel, so you can bring in different panels to there to make them easier to use, shortcuts effectively to use in your Photoshop workspace. And then right in the middle, of course, where the image is where your photograph will be shown. So what that means is you're going to be able to edit your image live. You're going to actually see the changes that are happening to your image, which of course is key to Photoshop. So I'm going to now click over into the actual Photoshop product, and I'm going to show you what is possible with Photoshop. So here we have the Photoshop screen open, and what you'll notice, I've got the same image, but this is the unedited version of the image. If you take a look here, you'll notice there's a lot less detail down here in the bushes by the river. You'll notice it's a little darker down here. It was early morning. I used a filter to make the sky come up a little bit darker, and while this image in itself is pretty good, the lighting and the coloring looks pretty good, I obviously wanted to edit it up, and I use RAW, so I'm going to talk a little bit about RAW Converter. I take all my photographs in RAW, and so what I did was I took it through the RAW editor first, and then that was the finished image. Now, a lot of the work that you see there is very subtle. The idea is not to make it look like it's been pushed and pulled too hard. The idea is to make it look more realistic to the scene. And this, what you're looking at now on the screen, is very close to what I was seeing at the time. The camera was not able to capture all of that detail in one shot because there was a lot of bright areas. If you take a look here on this mountain over here, that was really bright. And in the shadow areas here, there was still some light coming through, but in order to get a good exposure, I had to expose to make sure that those areas on the mountaintops didn't overexpose and lose detail there. So there was a bit of a trade-off. So what I did was I exposed for that. The foreground went a little dark, but in post-production and in Photoshop, I could bring those details right out. Now, what we're going to talk about in this course is when you edit photographs, you need to work through a workflow. And so the first thing that we're going to talk about is what is a workflow. So workflow is a system or a process that you work to, or a step-by-step process that helps you bring everything out of your images. So my first workflow obviously is I take a photograph, I save it onto an external hard drive, I then back it up onto another external hard drive, and I then will start editing my images. I shoot my images in RAW, and I do that because I want to make sure that I'm capturing as much of the information as possible that I can, and then from there I will edit those images in the RAW converter, bring them into Photoshop, and I'll always save a copy. So let's talk a little bit about how we do that. I'm going to assume that I've opened an image. Let's make it, this is my image over here. And the first thing we're going to look at is on the left hand side, as I said earlier, this is the tools panel. Now you'll notice as I scroll over each tool, it's telling me what it is and giving me a quick description of what it does. What you'll also notice if I hold over there, you'll notice there's some of these tools have a small triangle on the bottom right hand side. If I right click on that, let's take for example this tool here, if I right click on it, it'll show me the tools that are underneath it. So wherever you see a small triangle on the right hand side, you'll see there's other tools underneath it. And you'll be able to access those other tools by right clicking on the icon. Okay, so that's the first thing. So the main area there is your tools bar. You can also put additional tools here if you choose to. You can actually add different tools. So if I right click at the bottom on the ellipsis, I can actually add different tools to the toolbar. That is your personal choice. Generally I use the ones that come standard with the Photoshop setup. They tend to be the most used, and of course you can rearrange them. Then if we look at the top here, so as I click, if you take a look here, watch my options bar at the top over here. The options bar will change accordingly. So as I click each tool, it will change with different options at the top. So for example, on my selections tool, it's saying, do you want to create a new selection? Do you want to add to your selection? Do you want to subtract from your selection? How thick do you want the line to be of your selection? When I click on the next one, which is a quick selection tool, it offers me a different bunch of tools. If I click on the crop tool, it offers me a bit different bunch of options over there. So each tool over here is linked to the options bar. And that's what makes Photoshop so powerful. It allows you to very easily and very quickly adjust your image and make very specific adjustments based on the options that you choose. On the right hand side over here we have our panels, and you can customize again the panels that you want to see. These are the ones that I want to see. I want to see layers, and we're going to talk about layers later on. I want to see the histogram. We will talk about the histogram and how that works a little bit later on. And I do want to see the navigator. That sometimes gives me a good idea of where I'm at in the image, and we'll see exactly how that works as well. Those are the panels that I tend to use the most. At the top of Photoshop, we also have a menu bar right at the very top here. So you'll see it says Photoshop. I'm using a Mac, so it'll tell me Photoshop over here. And I have different menu bars that I can drop down for various types of functions. Not all of these are necessarily going to be used, because a lot of them, they're shortcuts, and a lot of them are also toolbars. But one that you might use more often than not is your image bar. This one here, adjustments, we're going to use that quite a bit. What you also notice, if you click on image and you go to adjustments and you drag your mouse across, you will notice on some of these there are shortcuts. So for example, Command L on the Mac or Control L on a PC will bring up the levels tool. Control M will bring up the curves tool. And so it goes on. You'll find that the shortcuts become a very key part of your speed and your efficiency in Photoshop. So try as quickly as you can to learn the shortcuts.